Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm the Sports Guru 716 and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Spittin' the Truth podcast. I'm here with Dylan and I hope you enjoy this week's episode. We're going to kind of cover the NHL trade deadline. By the way, in case what we talk about holds no relevance when this goes up, we are recording this Thursday for Saturday. So anything that happens between about say 5 o'clock Thursday evening and Saturday, whenever this goes up, we had no knowledge of that before we uploaded. So please bear with that, I guess, if something happens with a player like Andrew Ladd or Mikhail Bodker. We've got quite a few players, Eric Stahl, that we'll probably end up covering today, but just keep that in mind. Comment down below as you go along. I always forget about telling people to comment until all of a sudden at the end I'm like, oh, well, I probably should have told you guys to comment if you wanted to comment. But yeah, so Dylan, first I think we should talk about the buyers and sellers in the market. So how when you're looking at the standings, how far at this point we're at the trade deadline? How far do you think is too far away from a playoff spot to determine, like, okay, I'm out of there's no shot I have? Do you go with mathematical elimination, or do you think like maybe 10 points is too much to overcome, or less than that?
I don't know if there's really a number that I would be comfortable putting on it. Like if you're here and the last playoff team is here, then you should be a seller. And if you're above that, you should be a buyer or anything. I think it's more of a team-by-team basis thing, at least in my opinion. If you're a general manager, you have to assess where you are and what you've done up to this point in the season, but always have in mind, like, what kind of team you have. Like, for example, I'm trying to find a good example, kind of like Ottawa or maybe even Calgary, a little bit out of a spot, but they have a lot of young talent on those two teams. So it's like you could look to acquire someone good available, help you out. I wouldn't really want to, but if you have mostly a young team, then it may not make sense to buy a rental player. But if you can buy more of a longer-term solution, it makes sense. Or if you look at a team like we're young, maybe we sell one of our veterans, and then next year we'll be in a lot better position to contend.
I want to segue already into a player. I think you may have an idea of who I want to talk about. Actually, I guess many players are like that in this year's trade deadline talks, but I just want to quickly talk about Ottawa specifically. Last season, they went on a magical run. Now, I know that was a year ago, but was that luck or was that skill?
I wouldn't want to say luck because they do have a lot of talent on that team. And you look at Erik Karlsson, probably the best offensive defenseman in the league. And they've got guys, I know Turris has struggled, Stone's struggled a bit. And then they have Hoffman. Some of those guys are still very young, very good futures and careers ahead of them, most likely. I can't see the future, but you kind of got to think, like, maybe luck was part of it last year. Like, Mark Stone's second half of the year was incredible, and it put him into the top three in consideration for the Calder, just based on, like, half of a season. So you can think, like, oh, he just got hot. The team got hot at the right time, and they were a young team, so they went forward. So I wouldn't necessarily say, like, that's an outlier from what this team can do, but I still think it's a team that has to develop a bit and learn before they'll be amongst the tops in the league.
Yeah, I'm a pessimist, so I'm gonna side with luck more than skill here. But Andrew Hammond played out of his mind, and I was thinking about this, and the reason why I bring it up too is because I was thinking about Andrew Hammond for a minute and how bad he's been this year. And I know he's had some injuries, but he has been absolute garbage this year. And he reminds me, remember Michael Leighton for the Flyers when they made their run to the Cup against the first Cup for the Blackhawks with the Kane Taves era, and Michael Leighton came out of nowhere and brought the Flyers through the playoffs and stuff like that. That's what that reminds me of. Andrew Hammond reminds me of Michael Leighton. I don't know if you remember that Michael Leighton run, or if you see the similarities, if you believe there are the similarities there.
Yeah, I could see it. I mean, I remember Hammond last year. He came out of nowhere. Everyone sort of like fell in love. Like, oh, Hammond's the future goaltender of Ottawa and everything. And now Anderson's actually back from injury. They traded Robin Lehner to Buffalo. And Craig Anderson himself is, when healthy, generally a very good goaltender in the NHL. And he's the kind of guy that you can contend with, having him in net. But I don't know, maybe all that youth, all that excitement around the organization fueled them to overachieve a little bit last year, and then this year sort of tempering expectations. But I still think you have to assess that you're more likely to be better off going forward than saying, like, this is our year.
So if you're Ottawa, who's 4 points out of a playoff spot behind Pittsburgh right now in the wild card standings, do you try and add a veteran, or do you stick to? Well, actually, I guess what are we trying to say? They already added Dion Phaneuf. I guess that question is answered. They are trying to go for the playoffs this year. Well, do you think that Dion? I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I want to say for sure that was a move more for this year, or like to make them a contending team in the playoffs. But at the same time, I feel like that was more for the future development of the team. Do you feel that was more of a development move more than a rental move?
I think you can make the argument either way for this one. Like, obviously, Dion Phaneuf, great defenseman to have. I've always been a fan of his. And you can say for however long, most of his tenure in Toronto, he was their captain. So he brings leadership to your team that we've discussed is mostly pretty youthful for the time being. And so you bring in that leader who shows them. And it's like, he's the kind of guy, you're only a couple points out. So calling it quits with 20 games left is kind of ridiculous when you're 4 points out. What's that? 2 wins. Mm-hmm. And assuming you played the same number of games, and you're right there. So you bring in a guy like that, maybe some of the excitement, like, transfers to the players. Like, we brought in Dion Phaneuf, very good defenseman in this league, a guy who's going to help us win now, and that can get the players on your team excited, get them maybe start playing a little better, and get them on a hot streak or something. Whereas if you just started trading away your veterans, some of your players might be like, okay, I guess we're throwing in the towel for this season, and I guess that kind of would diminish your overall spirit in terms of the rest of the way.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of it, because it definitely brings leadership to a team that is younger and I believe still developing. As you can tell with the points the way they are out of the playoffs, where last year they were in it. And it's interesting to think about because he impacts them in both ways. And I think I'll just stick with the East here for a second, because above them, in between Pittsburgh and Ottawa, we have New Jersey and Carolina. a team in New Jersey that is New Jersey's 1 point out, and Carolina is only 2 points out. And I joke. Well, I haven't really been paying attention to the standings as much as I'd like to because I, newsflash, thought to myself, "Oh my God, Montreal's out of the playoffs a couple days ago, and they've been out of the playoffs for a while." And I think that also we may want to talk about. But are New Jersey and Carolina for real? I know they're two totally different teams. In my opinion, they're two totally different teams in two totally different directions in makeups. Are New Jersey and Carolina for real? If you are the GM of New Jersey or the GM of Carolina, what do you do this trade deadline?
I'll start with New Jersey, I guess. I think for New Jersey, you kind of have to look into buying a bit because so many of your players are up there in age where it's like if you're competing now, you might as well go for now because Camilleri, Elias, whatever, they aren't going to be around forever. And I know they've even had some injuries and stuff. Adam Henrique is having a pretty good year breaking out for them. I know Kyle Palmieri has been good. But if you look at it, I think New Jersey's success is greatly attributed to Corey Schneider. He is the New Jersey Devils pretty much this year. He's put the team on his back, and he might lead them to the playoffs. I've heard some reporters on Twitter joking like Corey Schneider should be in the MVP conversation because without him, that's almost an AHL roster. And I didn't really think about it until I read it, but I was struggling to name guys on New Jersey that are like doing well other than Corey Schneider. So you would hope, and also I want to say like, oh, buy a veteran, but I can't even name what they have to offer. So it's an interesting scenario there. And I think I would like to see them get some help because it's a shame when a player is doing that well for a team. And when you can say like one player is the entire team, you kind of got to feel bad for that one player. And Carolina, they're mostly a young team. They've got Falk. They've got Skinner, Lindholm, a bunch of other young guys. But I think the key thing there that will basically set the tone for the rest of the year is the decision they make on Eric Stahl. Because you're 2 points out of a playoff spot, but the rumors, I feel like that's better than Carolina and Carolina fans may have expected. But all season, it's like, oh, is Eric Stahl going to be traded? And now that they're actually 2 spots out, you don't want to trade away that leadership, that talent, everything when you're just barely out of it. But if you don't feel confident, then maybe you trade him, get a bigger return, and like with another team, come back next year with a better shot, be better prepared for a longer run.
That is literally what I was thinking when you said that earlier. That you said maybe a team has a veteran that they want to trade and just decide to go for it next year. I was thinking Carolina. Literally just like Carolina and Winnipeg, but we'll get to that later. But Carolina, I'm surprised, is only 2 points out. I know their possession numbers are very good, but you can think about it. Cam Ward's been okay the last month and a half, and Eddie Lack has been good. But at the same time, these goalies are like Cam Ward's had one good season or like one good moment, and he won a cup. But like, it's hard to believe that New Jersey and Carolina are where they are. And you look at Montreal, who is 5 points out, and I would almost be willing to say that I would rather Montreal be a buyer than Carolina or New Jersey. And you say New Jersey doesn't have anything to offer, and it's true. New Jersey is one of the worst prospect pools in the league. So it's like, that's why their team is always 30 years old, because they get guys that are like 28, 29, 30, established guys, but these guys are also probably a bunch of 20-goal scorers. Like, they don't get many good prospects in there and actually, like, get better. Pavel Zacha is going to be a good pick for them. They had an early pick in the draft, and that's their only good player. What are they going to trade Pavel Zacha for? Eric Stahl? Like, that's the sort of thing you're looking at here. Like, no, they're not going to do that, and that's all they have to offer. I guess they could trade one of their younger defensemen. They've done it before. But, like, New Jersey is just in a situation where it's like, you should go for now because look at your roster. It says go now. But at the same time, you have nothing to offer a team besides, I guess, draft picks to be like, hey, I want to go now, so trade me Eric Stahl or Mikhail Bodker or Radim Verbata or something like that and be like, okay, I want one of those guys, but I have nothing to give you. And I don't know, I think New Jersey's in a tough spot. They are in a tough spot. They're in a situation where they are too good to increase their prospect pool to make it better without very good drafting. But they're too bad to be in the playoffs. And you're right, Corey Schneider has carried the team. When you got Joe Blandisi doing everything for you and Adam Henrique, got old man Patrick Elias out there, which by all means, great player in his prime. He's not in his prime anymore. Not close. Patrick Elias is not the same Patrick Elias we knew before. So New Jersey's in a situation where they're caught with a double-edged sword. Do I buy now and just continue my trend of being average? And people joke and say, why go for 8th when you can go for maybe 4th or 5th 2 years down the road instead of going for 8th every year? And then you have the other side of the coin where people are like, well, Los Angeles won as an 8th seed or something like that. And it's like, well, LA is also very good. Like LA, everyone knew LA was good. Like I look at these standings, and I'll switch the topic a little bit to Montreal right now. If Montreal gets Carey Price back and they get into the 8th seed, I'm afraid of them if I'm Washington. That is not Pittsburgh. That's not New Jersey. That's not Carolina. Pittsburgh's a good team in their own right, but that's not New Jersey or Carolina. That's Montreal. They have one of the best goalies in the league as well. They could win that series. They've done it against you before. If you're Montreal, Dylan, you are 5 points back. Carey Price isn't coming back real soon here, but are you going to take the season as a loss? Well, I know you're not going to take the season as a loss, but at this deadline, you kind of got to, decide. Are you going to go for it or are you not?
I think it would be easier for us to decide if we had more clarity on the Carey Price situation, which I'm sure Montreal knows more than anybody about if and when Carey Price will return this season. And if you're confident that he's shut down for the year, then I think you're more likely just to say, okay, maybe we won't get on this run or whatever, or maybe you look to the trade market and see what's available depending on what you have to give up. I've heard that Montreal could be interested in someone like James Reimer from Toronto, and he could certainly come. He's had a pretty solid year for Toronto, awful team. Maybe he comes in, fills the void, at least until Carey Price is ready to play, helps them maybe stay afloat or inch up more into contention, maybe gets them into the playoffs, and then say Price can come back, takes over the job again, and they're right back into contention. Like you said, if they get in as an 8th seed and have Carey Price back, that's a team to be worried about. But it's tough because if Price isn't coming back this year, then you basically have to assess your roster and think, without Carey Price, what would it take to make this a contending team without compromising too much for when you do have Carey Price? which could be as late as next season.
It's a very tough situation in Montreal. Marc Bergevin has a very, very, full plate of options here because he 5 points out, and he will, if he wants to do it, he's got to do it, and he's going to have to do it. Like, that's only 2.5 wins, but Pittsburgh has 2 games in hand, so that could be 9 points. So they've got to really figure it out. If they can't get Carey Price, they will have to make a deal for James Reimer. I joked and said Chad Johnson once, and someone got upset. We know who got upset, but, someone got upset. And, well, if they're willing to consider Reimer, I don't think it's out of the question, although Johnson is clearly worse, to say that they wouldn't consider a Johnson or a Frederick Anderson out of Anaheim or a Jonas Hiller out of Calgary, names I've seen as possible players to be traded this trade deadline, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Philly's there, Ottawa's there, a couple points out. We already talked about Ottawa. Philly is 5 points out, but I think Philly's kind of an enigma. I think if I'm Philly, I'm kind of like Carolina, where you have Giroux and Voracek, but at the same time, I think that you have to understand that your team is still growing. I don't know. I guess we should touch on Philly a little bit. If I'm Philly, I don't buy now. I don't necessarily sell, but I don't buy. I don't really think Philly's got what it takes to get into the playoffs and actually make something happen against Washington. I think these teams have to really look at this and be like, can I get in and make something of Washington? Because that is what it's about. Can I go there and can I beat Washington? And I don't think any of these teams besides Montreal would have a chance when they're healthy. If you're Philly, you're Ron Hextall. What are you going to do Monday?
It's another tough one, of course, because you don't want to give up and start selling, but at the same time, you're Philadelphia. You're not trading Giroux. You're not trading Voracek. You're probably not trading Wayne Simmons or Braden Shen. So you don't really have the players that you're going to sell off in order to make yourself better for the future. But then again, it's how much you're a little farther out of it, and you're not like Montreal is where they are, and they're missing one of the best goalies in the league. I don't think we're looking at Philly and saying if they had this player that's out with injury, they'd be right up in it or whatever. So I don't know if it's something you can quick fix with a trade on Monday, but I certainly don't think you want to part with any of the guys you currently have. And I mean, it's kind of surprising that, I don't want to say it's really surprising that they're that far out, but they have good players. I know a lot of them struggled. Jakub Voracek struggled for a lot of this year, and Braden Shen's starting to break out. Your boy Shane Gostisbehere's doing very well, and I feel like it's kind of one of those things to where you can make moves, but I think with the players you have, Drew's 28. I think Voracek's 25, 26. Simmons is around there. Shen's 24. Gostisbehere's young. You got Provorov coming up probably, maybe next year. I don't want to say probably, but you would think. So it's one of those things maybe you just roll with it and hope that maybe next year these guys will all come in, click from the start, get hot, and it's the kind of team that you just got to play the waiting game with for a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're going to fly by the seat of your pants if you're Philly and just kind of go through Monday and not do anything. I'm trying to think. Maybe they trade Medvedev or something. Maybe sell a small piece, a player that really doesn't factor into their future. I I guess that makes them a seller, but at the same time, I don't think they're really looking for that. I think if they're getting off, they're gonna be like, hey, so and so's available. If you want him, you can take him, but at the same time, we're not really gonna be hunting somebody down to be like, we're openly looking to trade. Like you see, I saw McKenzie or Drager, I forget which one, post like Vancouver and Calgary's like list of players that they're out in the block. It's like that's like pretty much like a Craigslist ad. We are offering all these players right here on this list. These guys are the ones that are available. You know, this is like the Dynasty Hockey League we're in. This is my trade block. Here it is. Everybody, you can look at it and decide what you want to do. But I don't know. I think if somebody honestly is giving them a list of players like that are available, that's not good. We joked Vancouver. That was before we started this, but when Vancouver did that Chris Higgins thing where they pretty much went out on Twitter and said, hey, does anyone want Chris Higgins? And it was literally like honest, like they want to trade Chris Higgins. He's on the block thing on one of the TSN analysts. Like they openly want to trade Higgins, and and everybody in the NHL is like, so you're offering him like this? No, I'm not going to trade him. Obviously, you're this desperate that you're willing to post it on social media. That's unheard of in professional sports, even amateur sports. So, like this, I don't want to talk about too much about that, I guess. All right, I think we can move over to the Western Conference before we kind of talk about players specifically, but Nashville and Colorado are in it. You know, Colorado did not do very well last year. They made the playoffs the year before, and now they've returned to the playoffs. They're in contention. They have 3 games in hand. I mean, they have played 3 more games than Minnesota, who is 4 points back and fired their head coach, Mike. I don't even know how to say his last name, although it's real simple. Yeo, whatever. They fired their coach, and now they got their new guy in there, and they're 4 points back, 3 games in hand. Minnesota is definitely a buy now team, isn't it?
I would certainly say so. In terms of for Minnesota, it's either I feel like they're kind of there, or have been there for every year for the past couple. They've got some older players on their roster, and they do have a mix of some younger players, but I think overall they have a good shot, and they've been there before with mostly the team that they have.
I think I just thought of a question, and I asked you it last week about Mario Williams and the big deal that we gave him, and you know now he's come out and said that he wants a pay cut, but we signed him to that big deal, and we were all real thrilled. And a couple of off seasons ago, Minnesota went big on Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, and now they're in a situation now where they've always been that average team in the playoffs, that lower seeded team that gets in the playoffs and gets squashed. Was it worth it? Do you think it was worth it bringing in Parise and Suter with those big contracts in hindsight?
I do want to say that it was worth it, because like that offseason they were clearly the top 2 free agents. They made a big splash signing these 2 guys, bringing them in, and as we've said, they haven't really gone on that run or been like the number 1 team, but they have been in contention each of those years, like pretty much each of those years, and you have to think that is largely in part to bringing in Parise and Suter. Now, we probably don't have time for this in a show, but you could go back and look the past couple seasons, like where else could they have spent this money? Who else could they have brought in? And obviously that's largely speculative, but I mean, at the time, I think I said this almost exact quote about Mario Williams. At the time, you can't fault him for the move. And but maybe it hasn't quite worked out as well as they've hoped. But I think currently with the team, they still have a very good team. I don't know if it's ever a team that's going to like blow you away, but it's something. It's pretty sound. I think they've got a lot of good depth too, and I would not be surprised one bit if they took one of these playoff spots in the next 20 games and held on to it.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about Colorado in that spot and Minnesota being behind them with the talent they do have. I'm not going to doubt the talent that they have with even guys that are underperforming, the older, former Buffalo Sabres they have in Pominville and Vanek, both players that are definitely underperforming for them. And, what they're truly capable of if all their players kind of just get going like they should. We're not going to, all of them are past their prime. So it's just a matter of, like, Parise's towards the end of his, upper echelon time. Like, Suter's very solid defenseman, but his offensive numbers are not, his offensive potential is not quite as high. I don't know if I'm Minnesota. You've got to go by now. Your team is too much. There's too many older players on it to not do it. Like, it's not because their prospect pool is bad like New Jersey, because there's the two totally different teams, and in terms of just positions and who's carrying. Like Minnesota, they've got Devin Dubnyk, who I'll openly say I didn't like, and I still am skeptical about. But it's totally different than New Jersey, who's literally being carried by Corey Schneider and don't really have much to offer in terms of forwards, where Minnesota has a ton to offer in terms of skill. Really, yeah, think about it. Minnesota is one of the more skilled teams on paper in the league, and it's just a matter of actually, getting it done. You're right. You can't fault them for it because they went after these two guys and they got the two biggest free agents, and everyone was like, "Holy crap, Minnesota's going in for it!" Like they want it, and they've been in the playoffs, but I never thought that they could win the cup. So I don't know if I can say that they were a cup contender, but I think they're a playoff team. Kind of like I feel about Anaheim this year, but I won't really get into that too much. But really, Minnesota is the only team in the Western Conference that's out of a playoff spot that could make it. You have Arizona, who's 8 points back with 3 games in hand, but Arizona is definitely, we can assume Arizona is definitely not a buyer because just the way their roster is built. If anything, it will be a seller, in my opinion. The Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, Edmonton of the world, those guys, in my opinion, all sellers. Just like Columbus, the Sabres, and Toronto. I don't know. Do you think any of those teams beyond Minnesota and Montreal are really gonna be anything but a seller?
No. When you, obviously looking at the teams, you're not gonna. A lot of those teams listed, Arizona, Calgary, Winnipeg, Edmonton, they're full of young talent. So it's like to buy, you would have to get rid of some. And it's like when you're in your position and as far out as you are, you're going to have to buy a lot to get you out of there. And it makes more sense, I guess, to just sell some of your veterans, some of the depth. But I don't think that necessarily takes these guys out of the market in terms of acquiring players, because we could see some young players on the move. We could see maybe we see a John Druin deal for one of these 8 teams. Maybe, I know you have various thoughts on that. Maybe one of them goes after Freddie Anderson if they need help in goal. Maybe somebody, I don't know. There's some young talent that can help you down the road, and you might see one of these teams buy into that. But overall, I think they're mostly just going to be selling off and looking forward to next year, or the draft, I guess, would be next most important.
Yeah, for a lot of these teams, they're like, draft lottery, let's go. For me, it's draft lottery, let's go. Let's figure this out. It's time. And we've done a podcast on Jonathan Druin already, and I've done my own separate video, which continues to rack up views. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, go over to it and watch it. Yeah, my opinion's well known there. If you read the title, you already know my opinion, but I explain it. If you disagree, comment below in that video, and I'll see the comments. But with that, I think we'll go to more of a specific player basis. I know we kind of talked about Eric Stahl a little bit, and I'm about to bring him up because we know what he's capable of. You know, he's a very, very good player. We know he's capable of a lot. Now, on this list, there's 10 players. And it's not a matter of really how they're ranked, but I think we can use this as a tool. Do you, if you were a team, now I know it kind of depends on what team you are, but at the same time, would you prefer, are you going to go for Eric Stahl, or are you going to go for Andrew Ladd, and why?
I hadn't really thought about much of a debate between like the choice of the two. It's obviously you can easily make the case for either if you need help. If you need help at center, then I think it would be better to go for Stahl. But Stahl has also played wing in his career, and both have been very, very talented. I think I don't want to say this with 100% certainty, but I think that you might, for a more offensive focus, go for someone like Eric Stahl. And of course, you would never expect this anymore, but I'm pretty sure did he have a 100-point season before, or up in the 90s?
I don't know. I'll look it up. You can keep saying your point, and I'll tell you.
So I think if you need strictly, if you're looking for offensive player, a leader, he's been the captain of Carolina for quite some time now, I think. I know he's the captain. I don't know how long it's been, but you can bring him in. Obviously, I think he'll help. But the price I don't know what the price to convince Carolina that they're a seller would be, because they might be able to say, like, well, we're barely out of it. We can just hang on to him if we want and raise the price that way using leverage, whereas Winnipeg doesn't have that case to make. They can't say, well, Andrew Ladd's going to help us make the playoffs. It's Winnipeg probably not making the playoffs. So I think depending on your style of team, like what you're looking for, and it could come down to price, whether maybe Carolina does use that little bit of leverage and say, we're just outside of a playoff spot. You have to make us want to trade Eric Stahl if you want him and get a little bit more.
Much to my surprise, Eric Stahl did have a 100-point season, and it was his second season, and it was the 05-06 year. Since then, I don't think he's had more than 82. And, you know, lately he's obviously regressed, and I say all the time that, well, I say all the time, but I read a lot of research that said that between the ages of 25 and 27, a player is athletically at their prime. Whether or not their numbers dictate that is something different due to experience and players you're playing with and things like that. But generally, your body is at its athletic prime between 25 and 27 years old. And and you can see Eric Stahl decrease since then because he is, you know, older now. 2003 he was drafted. That 12 years ago. He's about 30, 31, 32 years old. So it's a thing. I understand your point completely with Carolina saying, hey, I could make the playoffs. Like, you're gonna tell me right now that I have to trade Eric Stahl? I could make the playoffs. I'm a game out. I'm 2 points out of a playoff spot, and Eric Stahl is definitely, in my opinion, the most offensive player on the market in just terms of sheer ability offensively. I would take Andrew Ladd, and I assume to you, I don't think this is going to be as much of a surprise, but to a viewer, I'm more of I value more of a two-way player than a offensive player, because I think in the playoffs, Andrew Ladd is going to prove to be more valuable than Eric Stahl, just in terms of him being able to play 20 minutes and maybe shut down another team. Be able to get under the skin of another team, it's still offensively gifted enough to not be a drag on your team. You can put him on your second line, your third line, and he could score you like 8-10 goals in the playoffs, and it wouldn't be a surprise to me. Eric Stahl could put in 12, but I don't think you can rely on him on the penalty kill or in a more defensive role as much as you could Andrew Ladd. But it's based on taste. There's other players on this list. There's Louis Eriksson. I think he's going to be re-signed. I think Boston's in a playoff spot. So with something like this, there's a couple players on this list that are in playoff spots. You've got jeez Louise. The Islanders are in the playoffs. All right, so you've got players like Eriksson, Okposo, Anderson. Well, those players are the ones. You've got those three guys, and you think to yourself, okay, I'm in the playoffs. Boston is focusing on re-signing, and Okposo has been good with Tavares, and Anderson may be the goalie that Anaheim needs. If you're more specifically the Islanders or the Ducks, I guess we should separate that kind of. Let's go with the Ducks first, because I'm a John Gibson fan. So you've got the Ducks, and you bring up Edmonton as a team that may want to, well, not Edmonton necessarily, but a younger team that may need a goalie, may make an offer for Frederik Andersen. If you're the Ducks, are you open to that as a team that's in the playoffs, or are you going to be kind of skeptical and hold off?
If you're in Anaheim's position, I think you have to be open to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to trade. And it's like, I would certainly listen to anything if someone called about Frederik Andersen, because you think, okay, John Gibson is in all likelihood the future in net for Anaheim. So if they can trade him, maybe get something solid in return, then that would help them on their playoff push, then sure, listen. But then you have to know that in doing that, you're putting a lot of faith in John Gibson the rest of the way this year. If I'm not mistaken, Anderson's a restricted free agent after this season, so you could always keep him for the year, maybe trade his rights or take the compensation in the offseason. But I feel like it's unlikely that, I don't want to say it's unlikely that they re-sign him, because restricted free agents rarely leave in terms of the compensation. But I think if you don't get an offer that you love for him, then it certainly makes sense to keep him and go forward through the playoffs with both him and Gibson, and then maybe in the offseason you look to make that move.
as a Gibson fan, I would be more for keeping Anderson on the roster throughout the playoffs because both are relatively unproven in the playoffs, and that's kind of my big knock against Anaheim right now. I know the Anaheim team has talented players, and they have very good, in my opinion, very good defense. I don't think their wings are very strong. I think that's their weakness in terms of their skaters is their wings. When you have Mike Santorelli on your first line, I've brought this up before, you really should really think about what you've got going on right now. But I think in net they should hang on to Anderson, not necessarily to be like, okay, we're going to decide now, are we going to re-sign Anderson or not, but to just have that emergency, blanket there for Gibson in case Gibson, takes a crap in one of the games or something. I don't even know why Okposo is on this list. And reason I say that is, why would the Islanders trade Kyle Okposo? Besides him being a possible free agent, he has 45 points this season. He's not a bad player. He helps John. He's the only guy with John Tavares on that team. I don't understand it. Do you think there's any chance that the Islanders trade Kyle Okposo?
I'm not a fan of using the word never, but I think it's certainly unlikely. I was surprised to see him on that list too. I mean, I've heard certainly a lot of rumors about Travis Hamonic being traded from New York, but I hadn't heard anything about Okposo being dealt. And honestly, they're in a playoff spot, so I don't know what they're going to trade Okposo for that would expect them to be better, unless it's in the vein of when they traded Matt Molson to Buffalo for Vanek and that type of deal. And doing something like that seems unlikely to me. So I wouldn't rule it out 100% just because you never know. Maybe we'll get a surprise deadline day deal. But I think it does seem unlikely. And unless I saw the deal, I don't really think of anything right now that to me makes sense for them to pull the trigger on.
Honestly, I think trading Kyle Okposo is just saying, hey, sweep me in the first round of the playoffs. Just let's get it out of the way now. Just sweep me in the first round. I don't need to, win. No. Tavares is one of the better highly skilled players in the league, but when he literally has nobody really to score with him, you're gonna have some troubles there. Yeah, I don't see them trading him. I don't know why he's on this list. I really don't. I see that, you bring up the Vanek thing, and it made me laugh. And I read an article this week, 5 worst deadline deals, and, Darcy got one in right before he left. He screwed Garth, and that is great. That is great. What happened there has changed the team for a long time. I know Molson, it's not necessarily that trade, but what that trade allowed us to do afterwards. I think one of our buddies one time broke it all down and figured out, or it was you or one of our buddies broke it all down to see what we got out of that trade after we traded the pieces that we got. And it was interesting. It really allowed us to do a lot. So thank you, Garth Snow. And yeah. Oh, darn, we're at 50 minutes. All right, well, that was a long episode. I wish we could talk more. We could talk about the deadline for a while with all the players that could be traded, but I don't want to also, kill you, the viewer, and you all of a sudden be like, holy crap. If you're this far into the video and you're not giving it a like, to be honest, I don't know why you're here. So if you're this far, give it a like down below, comment with your opinions. I will reply to all. I'm sure Dylan will also look back at the video and reply to any comment if any are directed at him. And yeah, so subscribe, by the way. Every day I upload something, whether it's hockey, football, NASCAR. I want to do a little bit of boxing, a little bit of esports, and yeah, so thank you for watching, and hope to see you again next week.
Bye.